My sister she's 69 years old, so she's 16 years older than me. My mother was married to her father. She had my two oldest sisters with him. They divorced. My grandmother lived in Moro, Arkansas. It's a small, I don't even know if you could call it a town. It was a farming town. They had a farm, they grew cotton. And this was back in 1959. And so they were poor, just had an old farmhouse, no air conditioning or anything like that. My grandfather had died at 45. So my grandmother was left raising 6 of her 9 kids by herself. My mother moved in with my 2 sisters to help my grandmother out because she was on her own. They were trying to work this cotton farm and they were working in town. My mother worked at a diner. And so anyways, my sister told me that she said I was about 9 years old. It was 1959. She said me and the couple of my aunts and uncle were out in the yard. They were playing hide and seek. And she said it was in the summer. She said, and I was it. So I was counting. And she said, I looked up, and when I did, she said, I seen what I thought was a man walking down the road towards our property. She said it was weird because it was sort of walking, sort of kind of slouched over forward, and the arms were slinging back and forth. And she said, I thought it was a drunk man. She said, but I noticed that as it got closer, I could see the hair swaying from its arms. And so she said, I immediately thought, oh my God, that's a monkey. Well, they had a bridge right before you get to their property. It had a creek that ran up under it. She said, this thing jumps over the bridge. And she said, it was a good ways down to the creek from the top of the bridge. Her dad was a naval officer, and he had come the next day. And she said, you know how you are when you're kids, you got something on your mind. She said, I just nagged him. I kept telling him, Daddy, there's a monkey down there in the woods. And she said, finally, he goes, come on, girl, let's go down there and see what you're talking about. And she said, sure enough, in that sandy bank, she said, I have never seen footprints that big in my life. She said, Daddy put his foot inside of it and it just swallowed it. And she said, I commenced to go, and I told you there was a monkey. And she said, I can remember him grabbing my hand and squeezing it. And he said, come on, girl, let's get out of here. And she said, but I told you there's a monkey down here, right? And he said, no. He goes, it's just a giant bird. Well, that night, they were poor. They didn't have any air. And she said, me being the oldest, she said, I got to sleep by the window. We had pushed the bed up against the window, and there was like 3 or 4 of them in a bed. And they had it raised. And she said, we had a screen on there to keep the mosquitoes out. She said, I was asleep, and I felt something hot on my face. And she said, I had to tilt my head back to look up at the window. And she said, taking the whole window up, she said, I just thought a gorilla. This thing is a massive gorilla. And she said, I swear to you, Jonnie, that thing had red eyes. And I was like, were they glowing? Did you have, she said, we didn't have any dusk to dawn lights or anything. She said, it was pitch black on that farm. And she said, there was no way these things could be picking up any kind of light. She said, these eyes were red. And she said, I was so terrified, I could not scream. She said, so I managed to grab the sheet. And she said, I don't know, it could have taken me hours to finally pull that thing up over my head. She said, because being 9 years old, I kept thinking, if I can cover my head up, it can't see me. And she said, so I finally was able to get the cover over my head. And she said, I just laid there just trembling, thinking that it's going to reach its arm in and it's going to grab me. She said, at some point I fell asleep. She said, I did wind up falling asleep. She said, but Grandma was hanging clothes out on the line one day, and she said, this is just during the middle of the day. And she turns around, and that thing's standing there in their yard watching my grandmother. Well, my grandmother screams, and this is where my aunt picks up the story that she had told me a few years ago. And they're all telling, all the stories are consistent between my aunts and my sister. And this has been years ago. And my aunt told me, she said, I hear Mama screaming to grab the gun. And she said, all we had was a little 22. She said, so I get it. And when I run outside, she said, Mama's in the car. This thing had been watching her. And when she screamed, it took off running down the road. My grandmother was a small Scottish woman. I mean, she wasn't even 5 foot tall. She was really little. And she said, Mama is flying down the road. We're trying to catch up with it. And she said, I'm 12 years old. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do? What do you want me to do? And she said, get out and shoot that damn thing. She said, so it jumps over the bridge. She said, Mom skids to a stop. And she said, I'm terrified because I'm thinking this thing's going to grab me. And she's like, what do I do? What do I do? What if this thing gets me? And she goes, I'll call the sheriff. Shoot it, shoot it. She said, well, I ease over and look over the bridge. And she said, I don't see anything. She said, so I'm thinking that it was hiding up underneath the bridge. Well, this thing kept coming up on their property a lot. My sister actually told me, she said, yeah, I think that house was haunted too. And I was like, well, why do you think that? And she said, well, one night we were sitting there, and she said, like on Saturday night, scary movies would come on. She said, so all of us kids would go in the living room. And she said, of course, Mom and Grandma weren't there. We were there by ourselves watching a movie. And she said, all of a sudden the front door starts shaking, and it's shaking so bad that you can see the frame bending and the door bending. Something's trying to break into the house. She said, so I think, there was a ghost. And I was like, well, Beverly, I mean, wasn't that creature around at the same time? And she said, yeah, it was around the same time. And I was like, do you not think that thing was maybe trying to get into the house? And she was like, well, I never thought about that. She's like, I'd never thought about it like that. She goes, it was still haunted because one night we were asleep, and she said, Janie had gotten up, and I felt her walking on the mattress and jumping. And she said, I look up, and there is a ball of light in our bedroom, and she's trying to catch it. And I asked her, I said, what are you doing? She said, I'm trying to catch this ball of light. And she said, I seen it too. She goes, I don't know what it was. It kept floating around in the air, and she kept trying to jump up and grab it, and it would move. So she said, I just pulled her on her nightgown and told her, you need to lay back down. We just need to go to sleep. But anyways, how that story ended was there was about 20 farmers around that area that were having problems with this creature coming up. It was stealing chickens. It was scaring women and kids. So these farmers got together one night, and they decided they were going to go hunt this thing down. And she said it was a posse. She said maybe 20, 25, maybe 30 men. They go out at night to go hunt it. And she said, I don't know if they killed it or if they ran it off. She said, but we never seen it again after that.